So I'm pleased to introduce our panelists for this next panel, which is called Implications for the Pharmaceutical Industry in Canada. Kim Furlong will be presenting first. She's Director for Federal Government Affairs and Policy at Amgen Canada, followed by Elias Iliopoulos, sorry, I didn't get it right, who's Associate Director of Patient Access in Ontario and at the federal level for Merck Canada. And finally, Marc Legault, who's Director of Market Access and Strategic Pricing at Pfizer Canada. Thank you.
Merci. Good morning. Bonjour à tous. Let's see how this works. Click like this. Okay. So I'm Kim Furlong. I work for Amgen. I've been with them for about 9 years. And I know a lot of you in the room, but there's a lot of new faces. So thanks for having me. When Louise asks you to do something, you usually comply with a yes. So thanks for the invite. I met Louise a few years ago, but we really, we kind of gelled last year when I'll give you a quick story of what brings me here. I left Amgen for a year to make a couple kids, and when I came back, my boss at the time, a wonderful woman, said, Kim, you need to go back out there and you need to talk about value. Like, there's so much pressure on our ability to bring the products that we make to patients, and you need to fix it. You need to change the conversation. You need to talk about value. And I said to her, if I could do that with talking points, I think I'm a pretty good communicator. I think we have a good team of people on the field in Amgen that could go out there and speak to people about our value. We'll fail because we've been doing this for a few years, and you need to give me more. You need to give me something that I can anchor myself in with and really talk to people about. And at the same time, within Amgen Europe, there was a push to value-based healthcare. And one of our leaders in Brussels was really grasping to this idea of measuring value, measuring outcomes, and what that would mean for the entire system, but what it would mean for our company and our products. And the conversation took place around the board table in California, and we got the green light as a company to go out there and talk about value, because we truly believe that our products are meaningful and change the course of a patient's life. If, in the event of that course of treatment, the product doesn't work, our board and our leadership said, then people shouldn't pay for them. But we need to find a way to measure it. So Louise heard me last year speak on a panel, and then we became BFFs, and here I am today. To talk to you, no?
I'm not supposed to be BFFs with anybody.
But I adore you. Anyways, I like her a lot, and I kind of follow her around. So in the context of we've heard yesterday, you heard Andre and Terry and Fred talk about value-based healthcare, and I work for a company that makes drugs, and in Canada, the environment is like it is in every other place in the world. It's tough, value, affordability, ability to pay, budgets that are strained, governments that are trying to find, and private enterprise that are trying to find ways of making all of it work. So you've got this like economic growth, aging population, and the price of our medicines being in the focus. And really, when you look at this aging population, people managing these chronic diseases, like the burden of cancer, the ability of people to stay alive longer, new therapies being needed, mental health, which has been a huge cornerstone of the government's agenda, and the cost of mental health and how we deal with that, and just, you know, cardiovascular, like someone spoke earlier about the cost of statins and the different drugs in the system, that burden, with the price of our drugs, like we won't shy away from that debate, have been at the center front. And I will say this as a preamble to the rest of my chat. Affordability is something that we talk to governments and private insurers about every day. Our price of our drugs and what price should be paid for which indication, which criteria, which patient is a conversation that we have every day. So it's not like we come out there and say, this is the price and this is, you know, what you need to deal with. That conversation is dynamic and it's part of our daily routine, and we come to the table as partner in terms of figuring out ways to make things affordable and sustainable. But I think the piecemeal approach, and someone said it earlier this morning, of trying to do small fix and these plan designs are not changing. The mandate I've been given is to really talk and try to be a change agent within my capacity in the company to bring forward some policies that will kind of make every one of you in the room think, yeah, we should have value and we should be measuring it, and every intervention in the system should be compared to one another, and we should pick the best value for that intervention. So we need to improve the system. Everyone knows these stats. Almost 40% of budgets provincially go to health. In terms of a breakdown, you see that 29% go to the bricks and mortars, the hospital, about 15.7 to drugs, and physician account for the other 15.5. And the increase keeps going. Every bucket has an increase year over year. Our pillar, our section of the pie gets a lot of scrutiny. And I think value-based healthcare and measuring, whether doing a liver transplant or having the drug, what is the cost, and having that being very transparent around like what choices should Canadians be making as the potential of transforming how we do this. So these are just the stats that we feel very strongly about, that sometimes the drug is more effective in terms of the cost of the healthcare system, and if you use a drug effectively, if it's for the right patient at the right time, then that cost defers other costs in the system. And these are done, a lot of people will say, well, pharma just got these studies done just to prove that their drugs are more effective. But I think that they plant a seed for, if we were more adequately prepared to measure everything, we would see more and more of these stats come out, and they would come from CIHI and other agencies that are not linked to us. And then our products, like, most of you have been advocates for a long time, and you understand the life cycle of a drug. A lot of failures, takes a lot of time. We have a small amount of time on patents to recoup costs. That time goes down year after year after year, and it goes down from the time that it gets you to get to Health Canada or the FDA, and then the time it gets you to go through CADIT, and then the time it gets you to go through PCPA. And once PCPA has said yes, then you have the delay of every province signing their LOIs. And Canada is not unique. Like, every country has hurdles to manage costs, but that means that for us as an enterprise, that window gets smaller, and yet what we bring to society is that once we disappear and our patents disappear and competition is in its full form in the market, years after we've gone, society continues to benefit from those drugs. And this is something I presented, and some of you may have been in Vancouver last year. Someone was asking me, I think Durhane was saying, you need to tell people how you price drugs, and it's a very complex thing to do, but we start with the idea that there's all these medical costs. Like, we build the drug around finding ways to bring a product to market that would bear a difference from what already exists. Oh, this was a build slide. Let me go back, and it didn't build. And then you've got these societal values, like what will this drug be and the impact of a caregiver and other things, and then in the wider sense of the future indications that will come. So drug is not just a drug. The drug finds itself in the context of the entire environment that exists, and there's the cost of building it, manufacturing it, bringing it to, but there's also other things that go into deciding what that final price will be, and it is based on the entire ecosystem in which that drug finds its way. And I've spoken about this a little bit, this global process of having the price, the negotiation, and health technology assessment, and then the patient or the system pays for it. In Canada, there's a number of unique institutions that don't exist globally, and that interplay is a factor of where the price negotiation starts and where it ends. And then this is something that is part of our reality, and I would say, and I'll take off my Amgen hat for a second and say, if it was Kim Furlong, I would love in a perfect world that reference-based pricing did not exist, and all the price would be transparent, it would be the price. But the system as it exists, putting back my hat, is every country looks at what other countries pay in order to set a price. And in that order, the time where the drug is launched, so a company will look, okay, what are the prices in all of these markets? Where should we launch first? And your launch sequence is done on the price that you'll get, because every time that you launch in a different market, then that reference starts. And you look at that crisscross. It's a mess. Like it's complex, and when you look at the changes that PMPRB want to implement, like the countries that in the basket, they go to try to understand and address some of these questions. But as Joan was cited in the Montreal Economic Institute, the launch sequence is important to patients. It's important to clinical trials. It's important to the standard of care. We've had numerous conversations with Health Canada and federal people in terms of what you'll hear from the next two panelists is a little bit of the headwinds that are coming, and reiterating that affordability remains something that we're all willing to do. Having measured approaches, working with the industry in terms of the changes that the government wants to make, we will do our part, and we've already signaled that we're willing. We do it every day through PCPA to add like a price that's agreed upon that is, for both sides of the table, fair, for the lack of a better word. But the changes that are afoot in Canada and some of the pressures they're putting upon us will have a bearing on the drugs that come, how fast they come, what are approved. If a drug does not come to Canada because the company feels, well, no one will pay for this drug at the price that we're selling it, then the standard of care goes down. And then does that mean that when a clinical trial is set for the second, and that has become the standard of care in the rest of the world, because we don't do trials against placebo anymore, we do trials against what's in the market. So keep in the back of your mind that this is a complex system of decision making where we, as all Canadians working for these companies in Canada, wake up every morning thinking about patients, and that's what drives us. Like when I get up in the morning, I think there are people in Canada every day that benefit from what I do by working for this company and getting these drugs to market, and it's not this big monolithic kind of corporation. So, closing on what I started with, I do believe that in order for us to have a different conversation, in order for us not to be talking about a dollar here, a dollar there, how we're going to change the system, we need to all together agree to a way of measuring. I would love to see patient-reported outcomes like coming out from every corner, every smartphone being aggregated and giving a sense. And when you walk into your physician's office, it's not you getting your pressure taken there because you were late, looked for parking, and it's out of whack. Like you want to have like a multitude of points to show what you are. And I do believe that the patients have the power to move this. You are the loudest and most powerful voice in change, and political cycles are short, and elections around our multitude of jurisdictions are continual, and having people demanding that we measure, that we do this, that physicians get on board, that companies like ours put their products through the ringer, and if it works, you pay. If it doesn't work, you don't pay. If it works half the way, you pay half the price. But like just trying to find a way of moving from tweaking and putting downward pressure at the detriment of a better health system. So I'll stop there.
So thank you very much, Kim, and I would like to thank Louise and the organizers for the invitation and this opportunity to present at this year's summit. I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that as a father of 2 young daughters, I am appreciative of a not all male panel. So I'm going to change gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about something that can impact value-based frameworks and value-based outcomes. We heard throughout the day yesterday on a number of potential amendments of the regulations and policies that will undoubtedly impact pricing and subsequent time to access to innovative therapies. And these proposed changes may result in a negative impact on patient access and health outcomes. Affordability and sustainability are a constant, and within the healthcare system continue to be the imperatives that governments, and as we heard in the panel previously, private payers speak to and focus on in order to ensure Canadian patients continue to have access to innovative life-saving therapies. I think we as manufacturers continue to explore potential solutions and support sustainability enhancing efforts. These efforts range from innovative contracting, collection and implementation of real-world evidence, as well as patient assistance programs which facilitate early access for patients upon regulatory approval. I think an area which continues to garner greater interest related to improving system sustainability in personalized medicine and the use of companion diagnostics to support this clinical decision-making. So what is personalized medicine? Well, personalized medicine continues to evolve as a new paradigm, which uses individuals' genetic or biomarker profile in order to guide treatment. We know that not all patients are the same and will not respond to the therapy in the same manner. And as such, we use personalized medicine to provide the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. By using a tool or a test referred to as a biomarker test or a companion diagnostic, a determination can be made as to what can be the most effective treatment. And that effectiveness can be clinical effectiveness, but also tolerability, safety. Biomarkers are characterized within the body, are characteristics within the body that can be evaluated using these companion diagnostics, through companion diagnostics or biomarker tools. They are substances which are found in a number of different tissues, in blood and elsewhere, and these biomarkers are elevated or depressed depending on the disease state. The presence or absence of a specific biomarker can, in some instances, for certain diseases, help in choosing the right therapeutic option. As an example, I'll look to how biomarkers are helping personalized cancer care, and in particular in non-small cell lung cancer. We know that different people's tumors within non-small cell lung cancer exhibit different levels of different biomarkers. By testing reflexively for all of these biomarkers right off the bat for these patients, we can determine which is the most effective therapy for these patients. And in doing so, improving outcomes at the same time, improving tolerability, and improving the value that you're receiving from the therapy, because it is the therapy that is working in the patient most effectively. Now, biomarkers, I spoke to it in oncology, but biomarkers are not only benefiting patients in oncology. We see that biomarkers are being used to identify patients for therapy in a number of different disease states. We see psychiatry, infectious disease, and cardiology starting to grow in their utilization of biomarkers for the identification of the right patient. A report out of IMS showed that over the last 10 years, there's been a 4-fold increase in the number of biomarkers that are used to identify the right treatment. So biomarkers continue to contribute to affordable and sustainable healthcare. And again, what do biomarkers really do? Biomarkers improve health outcomes. Again, identifying the right patient for the right drug at the right time. They also make research and development of new medicines more efficient, allowing researchers to identify the right patient population to be studied in a phase 2 or phase 3 trial, making those results more effective in conducting cost-effectiveness analysis and allowing payers and other agencies to make decisions on these therapies. Finally, biomarkers create more sustainable healthcare systems, create more sustainable health systems as patients avoid receiving medicines that do not provide additional benefits. It is imperative for these patients to receive the drug as soon as they are identified in needing therapy. In taking a step forward, as we start to see how companion diagnostics are incorporated into the Canadian healthcare system, we can see here as an example, and this, I'm looking specifically at PCODER, but CDR is in a similar situation. The number of companion diagnostics or tests that are linked to therapies continue to rise. We can see here, this is the 2017 PCODER pipeline survey. 27% of new therapies that are submitted, are to be submitted to PCODER will have a biomarker test linked to the therapy. Now this is a doubling from 2015, and it's not just in one specific tumor site. You can see that it is across multiple tumor sites. Which brings me to the next slide. How do we evaluate the use of companion diagnostics? Prior to 2017, there was no formal process in which the drug and the test were evaluated simultaneously. At the beginning of 2017, PCODER introduced their new integrated companion diagnostic review into their own HTA assessment process. And by doing so, allow for a harmonized review and recommendation of both the drug as well as the companion diagnostic. In fact, Keytruda was the first therapy to be recommended with both the therapy and the companion diagnostic under this new process. Our own clinical program for Keytruda actually looks to companion diagnostics in each and every tumor type that it is being studied in to determine whether there is predictability in response based on the companion diagnostic. I think finally we need to look at how companion diagnostics are incorporated into the review, recommendation, and reimbursement process in Canada as a whole. I think there's a lot of disparity when we look across the process. I spoke to the fact that from a HTA perspective, PCODER has now harmonized the two, but if we look on either sides of the HTA assessment, there is disparity with respect to how regulatory authorities review the two. They are reviewed upon their own and may have different time frames to the regulatory approvals. As we look to funding decisions are made in each of the jurisdictions, in each of the provinces, and in each of those provinces, there is a different process to that approval, to that reimbursement. And then finally, just into the adoption of into the health system in each of the provinces, there are distinct challenges. Is it institutional? Is it provincial? Is it from a cancer agency perspective? These present significant challenges to harmonize that access to these companion diagnostics. And with that, I will stop there.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mark Legault. I work for Pfizer Canada. I'm also a member of the IMC Core Committee on PMPRB and Reform, which is what I'll be talking about today, also Biotech Canada. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about a topic that I've been quite active on, a topic that most Canadians have an idea about. We're with a privileged group today of many of you who've submitted submissions to the PMPRB modernization on the guidelines, as well as Health Canada regulatory reforms. Important work that needs to continue. I'll explain to you why in a few seconds. For the past 30 years, PMPRB has had the task of protecting Canadians from alleged excess revenue. This concept is uniquely Canadian. It's something that was at its origins a policy decision that became a regulatory decision 30 years ago, where when the Patent Act was adopted, the Government of Canada said it's important that we have the judiciary look at a DIN, a patented medicine, to determine whether or not this price is on-site or not. This regime has been in place for 30 years, and I'll make the argument this morning that it is in need of change. It has not kept up with the marketplace that it's trying to regulate, nor has it dealt with a lot of the challenging original, I would say, regulatory mandates it has taken on, including the definition of what is essentially a patented medicine. 30 years ago, when the Patent Act was enacted, patented medicines were grandfathered, and then forward, every year patented medicines were filing to PMPRB. 30 years later, and this is the annual report that I'm showing you here, patented medicines that are 30 years old are still reported to PMPRB. They are still in the data that Canadians receive as a scorecard as to the compliance, as to the challenges of pricing. There is a mix and match of not only high-cost drugs, patented vaccines, patented generic medicines, patented vaccines, patented rare disorders drugs. All of this is in a very heterogeneous pool of the 1,500 DINs, which is unfortunately leading to some misguided policy conclusions, I'll argue this morning, which I'll point out to you, a couple of them in the annual report, which I do encourage you to look at. It's on the website now at PMPRB. We expect CG1 to be issued soon, CG1 being the Government of Canada enacting new regulations and laws governing compliance with the rules. A very important milestone in the evolution of the PMPRB. I'll argue a very important one for everybody in this room, including myself. As was previously discussed, the maze that has become the Canadian pathway for patient reimbursement is becoming a bit of a gridlock. It is becoming extremely unpredictable. It is becoming somewhat fragile, to the point from the CLIA organization this morning. It's becoming unpredictable. 30 years ago, we said it's important that patented medicines find a way to come to Canada. 30 years later, the Government of Canada is asking what needs to change. And we're introducing very, very unique concepts to Canada, which are at the same time duplicating key elements of other features of the current reimbursement system. It's as if we are trying to line up the entire process into a one-stop shop where everyone is doing each other's homework. It is not clear to me how exactly this is all going to come to be. The Government of Canada is not very clear in terms of engaging with Canadians. Your own submissions are not available through the Government of Canada website for others to read and understand. It went into a vault. We do not know what we said, unfortunately. So the pathway in Canada, to Kim's point, has been for 30 years challenging, just like in other countries, and predictable because the framework has been solid and robust. What we're facing now is an equally challenging environment for reimbursement in Canada, and now introducing unpredictability to the marketplace with what exactly is a non-excessive price in this country. So case in point, and the Merck team has been very vocal about this for more than a year and a half. When we observed, the key call to action from the Government of Canada has been, Canada has become the second highest priced country in the world. We all heard this. We all heard this. We signaled, we engaged, we discussed, we suggested that unfortunately the methodology being used would drive this behavior, and we anticipated that without change, because of currency fluctuations, Canada would normalize back to its historic position, which has been in the middle of the 7. And in fact, if you take my earlier point where you remove drugs that are competing with multi-source products and just look at drugs that were newly launched, we're closer to the bottom of the 7, not the top of the 7. So how could this be? And the answer is we are having a superficial conversation on a topic that is very important to everybody in this room, very important to innovation, that is not occurring, unfortunately. So what's driving the pressure now? I think the easiest way for me, without turning everybody in this room into a pricing expert on PMPRB guidelines and processes, let me point to this slide to suggest the pressure that we're seeing for change is driven by the guidelines and the regulations that are written now that are struggling with innovation. Eureka moments, which are really highly impactful, highly beneficial to the system and to patients, are coming to the market. Good news. The pipeline is generating extremely effective medicines that are having profound positive impact on lives. This is what's driving the need for change. The IMC core, the leadership at IMC has embraced the concept of change. It's unfortunately somewhat, if not radically different than the change being proposed by the Government of Canada, but we do believe there is a pathway forward where innovation, which according to PMPRB's own numbers suggests that Out of a basket of 100 drugs, 61 is currently coming to Canada. This is in the PMPRB's own data. It's on the website. 61 are coming to Canada. Do we want to maintain that, or do we want to reduce that? That's an important conversation. We can solve the problem if we focus on the key concept of what risk is in terms of how PMPRB actually does their job. So, CG1 is coming. The Government of Canada is going to be consulting with everybody in this room. What are the appropriate measures that we need to do our job at PMPRB to be able to satisfy Canadians that this is not an excessive price? This conversation, I think, is going to start imminently. If it's not tomorrow, it'll be next Saturday. It's coming soon. The concept is, do you want PMPRB to take what CADIT does, PCODER does, bring it to PMPRB and says, before I issue your NOC, here's the requirements. The drug is safe and effective, but PMPRB has questions about whether or not this can be issued as a DIN. Yes, hold your breath. Is this really where we're going to go? This is what this consultation is about. What we at Pfizer and IMC are saying that there is an alternative approach to the one that's currently being contemplated, which is one on risk. Not every new DIN that comes to Canada, not every new innovative intervention that comes to this country poses a risk. As a result, not all requirements are necessary for every drug that comes, but where required, ask more. And to Kim's point, we will deliver more information, more details, more real-world evidence, more proof that if it works, great. But more often than not, the PMPRB in the current guidelines is squeezed to do a job once past the post, which was the point from the earlier presentation this morning. PMPRB, we agree, needs more time to do the job. These are highly impactful, highly differentiated drugs in the marketplace. We need time to look at that. If Health Canada is issuing an NOCC, we need time to look at the evidence that we're generating so that PMPRB can do their job to say, yes, this is onside the bright line, or it's not. So, where the product is differentiated, a lot of oversight, but where the market competes with itself, tendered products, multi-source products, products that are the 5th or 6th in class. PCPA is doing a good job for them. Why would the PMPRB be involved at that level at that time? In the future, we would see the PMPRB addressing a much narrower basket of drugs, much narrower. The estimated number that we looked at is probably 5% of what they're currently looking at now. But I think it's important for Canadians to weigh in to say and encourage them where other actors in the marketplace, where competition, where provinces want to induce competition, PMPRB do not duplicate the efforts being done at the regional or provincial levels. All you're doing is creating more of a gridlock and more of a traffic jam in that maze. So a very important conversation is about to start. Looking forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these great presentations. I'll hand it over to Martine and Linda.
Okay, just a couple of comments. One is about value-based outcomes on monitoring and measuring. Certainly all on board for that. Across all the systems, I guess, you know, we often talked about savings to the healthcare system of a new drug, but what about the savings to the disability costs? What about savings that keep people in their own home instead of having to go to long-term care? Those are all different budget items that are not often considered, and certainly not in my disease area. We've been asking for better measuring of outcomes for many, many years after the biologics were approved, just so we could prove to government that what we knew anecdotally, that more of our friends and colleagues were now working instead of being on disability. But we have no way to prove that information to government when we go to them. Personalized medicine, to me, it's a great idea. I know, so here there's concerns about the cost of the companion diagnostics when you speak to CADIT and different. So there's a lot of concerns there. It's not my area of expertise. PMPRB, you know, we certainly have had our challenges with them, trying to provide input and participate in their webinars, trying to get them to see the whole picture instead of they have a very narrow focus, and concerning that they're trying to expand their mandate when in fact we've seen the last few years that we have other pricing bodies stepping up. So why do we have a PMPRB if the price they're negotiating isn't even going to be the final price that's going to get paid, because PCPA and the provinces and CADIF and everybody else is negotiating as well. And a huge concern about new medicines being available for Canadians in the future. You know, we need to have access to these innovative medicines, and if we're not going to get access because it's too restrictive and too difficult for industry, because we are such a small player on the world stage, to bring a product to Canada, that's a huge concern. And we've already seen we have issues with clinical trial participation in this country, and a lot of issues. So I'll leave it there and let my colleague maybe elaborate.
Thank you very much for great presentations. We live in a world of globalization, and Kim, I really like your slide where, you know, one region has an impact on another. And when it comes to drug pricing, I understand, you know, sort of the business model that needs to be sustained from an industry perspective. And we've benefited in Canada from access to drugs being launched here very early on. And despite our reimbursement challenges, you know, we are able at the end to get funding for most of these drugs. With the changes that are looming, if you think from the consumer's perspective, you think of from the public. When you look at the PMPRB guidelines and changes that are being proposed, it makes a lot of sense that drug prices be lowered in Canada, because you look at the sticker shock or the sticker price, because that's really what consumers see. They don't see the listing agreement. They don't know at the end of what, you know, the drug cost is for a particular payer. And, you know, it makes a lot of sense. So from a patient's perspective, patient organization, trying to explain and to communicate why that could be a problem or why there could be some negative repercussions for Canadian sometimes can be challenging. And, you know, obviously the pharmaceutical industry has a vested interest in that discourse, but you come from a very biased perspective, let's be honest, in terms of, you know, what is in it for you as opposed to what's in it for patient. So how do you suggest we can bridge that gap and have, you know, more of a national sort of understanding of what the impact could be? And, you know, given that it's a very complex system, and trying to explain the different layers is you know, mind-boggling.
Well, Martin, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of Canadians understanding the system, and I think all of us interact with it on a daily basis, and we even challenge ourselves to truly understand all the inner workings of it. I was meeting with a member of parliament this week, and years ago, feels like yesterday, but maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I did a video for Amgen, kind of a infographic animated that talked about how drugs get approved in Canada, and he said that was the best thing that I've seen coming out, because it was simple and it told you, and now it's completely outdated because PCPA did not exist at the time. So, but I do think that the governments are not going to educate Canadians as to what the system is. There's a piece of literature that will come out of the conference board in a few weeks that talks about the uninsured population in Canada. A lot of Canadians are insured and they don't know. Like, it's not like they don't have access to it. It's just they're not aware. They're not utilizing the insurance that's available to them. I think that as a community, we need to do more in working from the grassroots and getting allies like Kai talks about, you know, drug stats all the time. Should we call on them to do more education and not just, you know, the stats? And should we co-create some of this education material? And of course the industry is biased, but I will say this. We would rather see a drug come to Canada with restrictions and at a lower price than not come at all. So we're vested in making sure that drugs come here. And I said this in my presentation, the people that work for all these drug companies in Canada are Canadians. So we all want the best for ourselves and our families.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it is a challenging topic. I'll point out I don't know who participated in the NP-DUIS briefing on the common formulary. My point being that clearly Canada adopts and covers for the benefit of Canadians an important list of drugs, which was yesterday's innovation, that are now commonly available across Canada, as they're pointing out, for a small basket of drugs. That took 25 years. The risk to everybody in this room is the underinsured and uninsured. PMPRB is going to reform. They're going to impose new restrictions, and the question then becomes, what do we do? What's the risk to the patient who doesn't have access to that med? Does it mean that we have to now talk about things like the SAP program, you know, traveling somewhere else to get access to a med? Delays in access to the med? What's the impact on the system for that? The more we can anchor it on the patient point of view around the risk to patients in the system, as a counter-argument to what's being proposed, is an important one. So to Kim's point, it's very important that we anchor this conversation on underinsured, non-insured, those who can't afford to pay when they are insured. The risk to everybody with these changes is still at the beginning of the life cycle of these products. At NOC, who's covered? And that's the problem that PMPRB is not solving for. They're saying, I want to have OECD median prices. Okay, that's 45% of the 100 drugs available launched from 2009 to 2015. So what's the risk of that? What happened to those 15 drugs? Did I need them? Does someone in my family need them? I think this is where we need to bring that conversation to bear, to say, what's the risk of this going forward from an underinsured, non-insured point of view? And how can these solutions I was discussing earlier around a different approach solve that problem versus the one that's being pushed currently?
And Linda, I think your comment around precision medicine and the costing of the testing itself is a very valid one. And there is, again, a diverse costing structure for many of these tests. Those which are molecular in nature versus those that are genetic in nature are obviously going to have this, broad range of costs attributed to them. Knowing though that as these therapies are submitted for, they are submitted for, and the cost effectiveness of these therapies is inclusive of the test itself. So when we look at the cost effectiveness of the drug, not only does it incorporate the test and the cost of that test, but also includes what that means to the patient population and what that means to the outcomes as well. So if we see the improved outcomes because it is being identified and used in the patients that are most likely to respond, you are actually putting the cost and putting the value back into the patient's outcome.
Yes, and some of the concerns I've heard, though, is the splitting, right? Because insurance company or public payer might pay under the drug program for that drug, and then this test is somewhere off in the healthcare system. So, health ministries or hospitals and have to include that in your budget.
Yeah. So that's a great point, and that was the point of my last slide, right? There is this great disparity that exists. There are some positive signs that we are moving to a more harmonized approach to how precision medicine and how personalized medicine and these biomarkers are going to be utilized and covered in the public and the private domain. And the recommendations, that's a start. Having them included so that the recommendation and subsequent reimbursement of these therapies occurs simultaneously is a move in the right direction.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to open it up for questions. I've flagged 2 over here. Let me know if there are some other ones. So we'll start over here at the back.
Thank you very much. I'm Chris Somerville, the CEO of the Schizophrenia Society of Canada. I've been dealing with mental health since conception. My mother, 7 of my mother's children had significant mental health problems and mental illnesses, suicide in the family, time in prison, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm thankful for the advent in psychiatric medicine. So the title was Implications for the Pharmaceutical Industry in Canada. What about the implications for patients living with enduring mental illness? Kim said many people benefit from what they do, many don't. I'm talking about people with mental illnesses, enduring mental illnesses like schizophrenia. We talk about measuring outcomes, symptom reduction, but many don't experience life satisfaction. Elias talks about personalized medicine, which is exciting, right outcomes, but a lot of people don't have the right outcomes. And for people with enduring mental illnesses, 20% die 15 to 20% earlier than the rest of you. Why? Not because of the schizophrenia, side effects of medication in terms of metabolic disorders and cardiovascular problems. And then finally, Mark talked about the pipeline. One of the psychiatrists at the Royal Ottawa Hospital said recently, there's nothing new in the pipeline coming down for psychiatric medications. There's nothing new. So when a pharmaceutical representative comes to me just recently and says, Chris, promote our long-acting injectable, again. So here's the question, and I'm not trying to be sarcastic. I love my psychiatrist. I performed her wedding as a minister. So much for boundary violations. Okay? I do have a nice heart with a southern accent, so why am I in Canada? That's another story. Well, maybe you know. Here's the question. This is what patients are asking me. This is what family members are asking me. With all the goodwill there is in pharmacare, here's the question. What is the pharmaceutical industry doing to join the mental health community in addressing the full spectrum of the social determinants of health that will result in quality of life?
Great question. You know, my wheelhouse is really the regulation and pricing of pharmaceuticals. So I'll go on a limb and I'll start to explain part of it, and then let's see where we land. I participated in Amsterdam in the World Health Organization Fair Pricing Forum, which was stakeholders from government officials, stakeholders from all walks of life, advocates, Gates, US government, Dutch government, French government. And essentially the same question was asked. What happened to the pipeline for antimicrobials? What is going on with the development? Because clearly where the market is struggling with high-cost drugs, there's a lot of activity, and then where there's not a lot of conversation and concern around cost, there's little activity. Why is this going on? And the answer and the consensus of the group across everybody, and there was Canadian representatives, there was representatives from the provinces, the IFPMA and the World Health Organization, and there was a resolution to say there needs to be a program that looks at these specific areas in order for development to continue, for innovation to occur. Because right now, for whatever reason in the marketplace, there's not a lot of investment, but something needs to be done. And there was an agreement that, at least for antibiotics, there would be a path forward with the innovators to go look for solutions with the right inducements, with the right reward to go with it. So that's how that conversation happened this spring, and I'm hopeful that this kind of thinking would drive us forward into perhaps other areas, including mental health. So I'll stop there, but that's probably the best way I can recount to you my own experiences on this conversation and where consensus was found amongst government officials, the industry, and advocates. And
I think I'd just say, what's the industry doing about it? Probably not enough. But I would say, and I speak as an individual, Amgen does not have drugs for mental illness. And so speaking as Kim, I think the last few years in Canada where all of the taboo around mental illness and more people speaking out and speaking openly about it is important. I think looking at the social determinants and the quality of life of people that struggle with that illness is a welcome signal to see provincial and federal governments having mental illness as focus areas for them for investment and efforts. No one industry, no one body, no one entity can take this on and solve it. But I will say that the conversation that's ongoing in Canada between Canadians, between governments, and the focus on the disease state that you are passionate in working in is something that everyone in the room everyone in this room has someone in their family or their immediate circle that deals with mental illness, and it's refreshing to have honest and open conversation because we have them around diabetes and cancer, and we should be having them around mental illness.
Another question here.
So, Ken Gagnon, speaking this time as Ken Gagnon, father of my daughter affected by a yet undiagnosed rare disease. You're speaking about precision medicine and to implementing the cost of those diagnostic tests within the price of the drug. My question is, for the last 10 years, 12 years ago, sequencing the human genome have taken a year and a half. Now you can have it in less than a couple of hours or a couple of days. You are also, my daughter just have it a couple of weeks back, but you can target 2,000 gene with a chip that will cost you less than $1,000 now. And 5 years ago, it was way too much expensive to just think about it. So my question is, when you're setting your price, you're setting it for the patent lifetime of your drugs, but the technology is going so fast, then your test that you're developing now, yes, there is a cost to develop it, but to do it in 2 years, it will be barely nothing. So how should the test be revisited at some point, the price of the test? Should the drug pricing be revisited when there is a companion testing? Or how do we assume the affordability of those tests, but also the evolution of the technology around it?
So, thank you. That's a great question. Maybe I'll just correct maybe one thing. Maybe I misspoke. So the price of it does not include the test, but the evaluation of it from a cost effectiveness perspective will take into account the costing of the test. So the drug price and the tests are completely different. And when we look at how the tests are receive regulatory approval versus the therapies, in most cases it's separate companies. And we look at it from the perspective of that's the cost for the test. And you're right, they do evolve, and they evolve very rapidly. In fact, if you look at molecular diagnostics, they usually within 1 year will become, using various antibodies and different methodologies, lab-developed tests or locally developed tests actually take their place and really reduce the cost significantly. If you look at molecular diagnostic tests, they range in price from about $200 to say $500. If you move them to a lab-developed or locally developed test, the costing then comes down quite significantly, right? So in terms of a revisit of the cost of the test, I mean, I can speak to our own experience around molecular diagnostic testing. It's quite different than it is with on the genetic side. And you're right, it has advanced so far that the cost of those individual tests is now very insignificant, and you're probably getting more information now than you were getting 5 years ago. So I think ultimately, when the costs, when the tests or the companion diagnostics are reimbursed, the reimbursement is for X amount of dollars or how much it costs for that particular test when it comes to the marketplace. But it should be adjusted as these more, I guess you would call generic tests come to fruition as well.
We have another question here.
Hi, my name is Peter Dorfman, and I'm from a patient group that we focus on chronic lymphocytic leukemia. We're all patients, and I myself will benefit from the new medications that are already out and approved, and some that hopefully will come. But I was at a meeting last February where the provincial cancer agency said that because the prices are so high, they were going to start to delay their process or have to look at several medications as they came out that were comparable and make decisions about which were the best ones to go forward. So in effect, they were saying they were going to delay medications coming out because they would group them before they made a decision. And one of the drugs that for chronic lymphocytic leukemia was listed on their slide. So they were kind of saying because of high costs, there may be delays in drugs coming to market through our process. And now I hear you and the Innovative Medicines Canada saying, well, if the prices don't stay high, there will be drugs not coming to market. So from a patient point of view, we're getting, drugs aren't coming to market from you guys, potentially, if the prices don't come down, or from cancer agencies who are saying drugs won't be coming to market because the prices are too high. Either way, we get drugs aren't coming to market. So it's a bit of a conundrum and hard for us to find a strategic point for us to exercise our influence. I mean, we'll still comment on the PMPRB stuff when it comes out and so forth, but it seems very polarized, and there's a lot of strong language in both directions, but neither piece of it seems to have a good outcome for patients.
So that's a great question. Do you want to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so that's a great question. I think the bottom line is that every day the price that is in the newspaper is not the price that it pays. And we could spend an entire forum talking about price transparency and what it should be. So what we've said to PMPRB from the get-go is we understand the industry will get a haircut. And we understand the modernization of your framework is required because really with the advent of PCPA, they're in a bit of a raison d'être kind of scenario, like what does it do? Why does PMPRB exist? So we get it, excessiveness, you have a mandate for protection of consumers, and we will work with you. So what we've said to PMPRB in all of our consultation and our interactions with policymakers is we expect that there will be a reduction. What we want is a measured reduction. So there's not that trigger effect of you've decreased the price so much in such a short timeline that our ability to adjust to that shockwave is difficult and will have ramifications in other sectors. And I'll let Mark add to it afterwards, but when I think about what the work that the cancer agencies are doing is they're saying we need to prioritize. There's a lot of things that come to this country. The Deputy Minister of Health, Simon Kennedy, said to me one day, I used to work at CFI, the regulator for fertilizers, CFIA, and we would not let a fertilizer come into Canada if it was not superior to the one before. What he forgets is that fertilizer and humans are different. And what works for one person and what works for the other is different. I have my own experience of being the 1% of the population that reacted very strongly to a drug, which was common and genericized. And I thought going into a treatment that I was like everyone else, like this would work for me. And when it didn't, it made me very aware that choice is important. So the cancer agencies are trying to contain costs by prioritizing and putting in place a gate system that says, this is not that much better, so we're not going to go for that one, and we're going to put our dollars where we think we're going to get the most bang for our buck. And if you put yourself in their shoes, you think, okay, we have limited resources. I think what we need to do is understand and make representations in terms of choice matters. And maybe there will be some instances where drugs are, the same, but the ability of the patient to choose should always be there. And what the Cancer Agency is doing is trying to find a way to solve what it sees as the problem. I think it's our job to really push really strongly for them to understand that there are ways around making sure all these drugs come to market at a price that is fair and reasonable to everyone, through having more conversations than just them figuring out what the framework is and imposing it on us.
So I just want to touch on something, because we're focusing a lot on PMPRB as one of the main issues here in delaying access and the issues of drug pricing, but I think you raise a very valid point, and that's how there are these efforts right now to put into play this layering and creating this multiplicity of review processes and looking at implementation and sequencing and all of that. And the introduction of CAPCA by the cancer agencies is going to create another layer, which creates a further delay. It's not a harmonized review process. It doesn't add on top of anything else that we are not already seeing, other than perhaps maybe looking at it more holistically and taking into account the available therapies that are there. But that speaks to the point of having options and making options available to patients. So I think we shouldn't be just focusing just on PMPRB as what could possibly create this delay to access and have a subsequent impact on health outcomes, but also looking at what's going on at the review and the assessment level to make sure that that doesn't impede access for patients as well.
We hear you loud and clear. It's, what's being introduced is a risk to everybody in terms of access to innovative medicines, with the cost-cutting measures that the federal government wants to impose. My message this morning is that there's an alternate way to do this that allows for, if with the current framework we're getting, according to PMPRB's own numbers, 61 innovations out of 100, well then that's got to be a key principle. What do we need to do to keep it at 61, or better what, increase it, but then find a way of maintaining a viable system, which is a modernized PMPRB that does not get in the way of CAPCA. So I'll exaggerate this a little bit. You do not need the federal court in CAPCA telling us we're not compliant on the price as a way of driving value. This makes no sense. This is exactly what they want us to do. And if there's one thing you know about the industry, we are extremely compliant. 30 years of PMPRB, there's very, 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 very few cases of non-compliance, and when they are come at important reputational risk. So this is not a light matter. This is the federal court saying, you are offside, and the industry will have to react to that. So CAPCA is doing their work. What we're saying, we have an alternative approach, and that does not involve PMPRB in the middle of the CAPCA conversations.
All right, on that note, I want to thank again the panelists for these great presentations and some great questions as well. Wonderful feedback from our patient respondents. We've been talking about CAPCA, so that's a good segue into this lunch discussion. So the 2, possibly 3 tables here for anyone who's interested in continuing that informal discussion. You're welcome. And I can smell, even with my stuffed up nose, that lunch is served. So bon appétit, and we will reconvene at 1:05.